Okay, so now I've got the screws put back in, I've got the plate reinstalled, we've got our spacer put in. So now it's time to add our glass plate and then re-level the bed. Now, I personally order my plates and glass and a lot of other materials from McMaster Carr. You can also find these on eBay and on Amazon. The reality is that because this is such a small build plate, you can use plate glass as well. I use borosilicate glass for a couple of reasons. The first being it's a lot less likely to shatter and crack under heat. But again, this is such a small bed, it's probably not going to make any difference. The real reason that I prefer borosilicate is it's flat. It's perfectly flat. Even plate glass that in small sizes from a picture frame, chances are it's still not going to be flat. There's still going to be some deviations to it. Again, such a small build plate probably won't matter, but the cost difference isn't really that big. This piece from McMaster Carr I think was $12.50. The ones that I've seen on Amazon seem to range from $6 to $8. And if you can find a piece of picture plate glass from Michael's or another hobby store like that, generally you can find those for $2 or $3. So, you know, go with whatever you like. I actually experimented with a couple of different sizes, a 5x5 inch, and this is a 6x5 inch. I found with the 5x5 inch, it'll work fine. And it's actually a bit easier to work with. Here, let me grab it. Solely because it doesn't cover the bed leveling screws. But in my experience, you can see I've got another Mini Select printer back there. The bed doesn't really come out of level, so I haven't had to adjust the screws over the course of even 30 or 40 prints. So for me, just having the larger piece of glass to cover the entire surface was just easier. It's also easier to clip it in, which we'll get to in a minute. But if you are worried about being able to re-level as you go, so this is the 5x5 inch piece of glass, and if I set it on the bed, you've got quite a bit of overhang front to back, although side to side is still pretty close to flush, so it's easy to clip or tape that on the sides. But again, we're gonna be doing this tutorial and walk through with the 6x5 inch, so you can see the difference in size there. And when you slide this on, it's gonna come really close to all 4 edges. The other thing that you might notice when you put the glass on the build plate the first time is the socket screws for leveling the build plate are not always super high tolerance. On my other printer, 2 of the screws actually come up above the build plate. So there's a small chance if you put it on and you notice, you know, there's a lot of overhang, even with the tape over the top of them. You may need to remove the tape temporarily and just take a piece of sandpaper and sand down the top. They're not super out of tolerance, maybe like 1/10 of a millimeter, but it can be enough that may cause some issues with thermal transfer. It's not going to set the flatness off because the borosilicate glass takes care of that, but it will reduce the effectiveness of the heating. So speaking of heating, I know one common concern is that when you put glass on top of your heated build plate, it can take much longer to heat up, or it can't hit high enough temperatures, lots of things like that. I found with this solution that I'm easily able to get to 80 degrees Celsius, no problem. And when I put the cork sheet underneath the build plate, which we'll get to in a bit. Getting to 85 and even 90 degrees Celsius is no problem. So now that we've got our glass on the bed, you think, okay, we're good to go, but not quite. The spacer that we're using is actually only going to be about 1/16 of an inch thick, and this is 1/8 inch plate glass. It's the thinnest that McMaster Carr will sell with Borosilicate. If you can find 1/16 inch, which I believe is close to 3 millimeters, maybe thinner than that. I'll check and put it in the video somewhere here. So we are going to have to re-level the bed again. All right, so we've got our glass plate. We need to apply our magic Aquanet to it. So in order to do that, we're just going to spray it on. I am going to move the printer out of the way just a bit. We'll cover in just a second how to apply hairspray once it's on the printer so that you don't have to take it off. But I figured I'd go over at least the technique that works really well for me when applying the hairspray to this. I am going to put out some paper towels just so I don't get it all over the desk. Normally I just spray this, you know, hold it up in the air, spray it, and you don't really have to worry about the hairspray getting anywhere, but for the video, I'm just going to protect the desk. So I just hold the bottle about 12 inches away from the glass, and you just want to apply really even thin coats. If it starts running, if it starts really pooling up, you've probably put too much on there and it's going to take a really long time to dry. You also want to make sure that you're in a fairly warm room, so you don't want to do this out in a unheated or unair conditioned garage. So I'm just going to just mist it down, and hopefully you can see what that looks like on the surface quality there. Just a little bit hazy, and you basically want to let it sit and dry for 3 or 4 minutes per coat, and I really recommend putting on 5, 6, or even 7 coats, and we'll show you what that looks like as we go here. The key is putting on the thin coats, because then it'll dry really quickly. If you put on one thick coat, it'll take a long time for the spray to set, which is not what we're looking for. Okay, so coat 1 is dry. See maybe 1 or 2 spots left there, but we'll go ahead and put the second coat on. Yep, that looks pretty good. And you can also, to kind of speed up the drying rate, if you just use your hand and wave it back and forth in the air, that'll accelerate it significantly. You could also use a hair dryer. If you do that, I would recommend putting it on the non-heated setting. You can use the heated setting for it, but I found that when you apply the hairspray to the print bed and heat it up while it's drying, it actually just evaporates most of the hairspray off instead of having it bond. So you really want this to air set versus heat set. Okay, so you'll notice that once it dries each time, it basically goes back to clear. You can really only just barely tell that there's anything on there, and that's actually kind of what we want. So we're just going to keep building this up, kind of layer after layer, and we'll know that we're getting close and we've got a good base of hairspray built up when the dried hairspray starts to look like the wet hairspray. So when it starts getting a little bit frosty, that means we've got a good base put down. So there we go. It's the third one, so let's put on a fourth coat. I'm already starting to see, even after 3, that I'm starting to get that frosted effect. So that means we're getting pretty close. Okay, so here we've got a 5x5 sheet of clean glass here. Let's see if I can get this angle just right. You can see how that looks, and then if we put this up against it, you can see the difference in the surface now that we've got 4 coats. You can see the difference now that we've got 4 coats of hairspray on there. So we're just going to keep applying it until we get a nice even surface. So one of the ways you can tell, I'm going to try to put this up so hopefully you can see what I'm talking about. But one of the ways you can tell when the coats are drying, when they're not fully dry, you might be able to see down here in this bottom corner, there's still a little bit of kind of almost milky finish to it. I'm trying to put it up against the black so that hopefully it'll show up a little bit better. But it's a little milky down here, whereas it's a nice even haze over the rest of the plate. So I must have sprayed a little bit extra or a little bit more down there that's taking longer to dry and cure. So you just want to make sure that there's none of that kind of milky look before you put on your next coat. On your initial couple of coats, you're very likely not going to see that at all just because it's spread on so thin, but as you're building it up, that's something that you can look for as an indicator for when that coat of hairspray is done and dry. Okay, so there we go, coat 4 done. Let's go for another one here. There we go. Coat 5. Let it dry. We're getting close. Probably only need another 2 coats, I think. But we'll see what this looks like when it dries. Okay. 5's done. Give it a shake. There we go. So that's a pretty thick layer 6, or coat 6. Putting on a little too much isn't so bad. But yeah, 6 or 7 coats should be good. And then we can pop this back on. And in order to put this on actually while it's on the printer, because occasionally, especially if you do prints that have a large surface area directly on the bed, you'll kind of want to recoat it just a little bit. You don't have to put on a bunch. To do that, while this is drying, let's move the printer back over here. So in order to do that, really, all you need to do is you want the Z-axis up and out of the way. So we're just going to move this up. So it's nice and out of the way. There we go. And then we just want the Y-axis as far forward as we can. There we go. And then all we're going to do is take a paper towel, all right? And we're just going to shield the gantry here. In fact, actually, I'm going to move the x-axis out just a little bit. You just want to shield the gantry like that. You can hold this with one hand and then use your spray with the other. Give it a little spray down. If you want to protect the LCD controller as well, again, just pop a paper towel there, give it a quick spray, and you're good. So that's pretty much all there is to it. Like I said, when this coat dries, I'm going to put one more on, just like I've shown for the rest. Now we're going to level the bed. Important to this is that we've got our glass plate, which we've got our 6 or 7 coats of hairspray on, so that it's to the thickness that we're actually going to print with. And you'll notice that I've left the masking tape that came with the printer on the printer. I would recommend leaving the tape on, or if you want to replace it with your standard blue painter's tape. And the reason for that, it gives a little bit extra surface for the glass plate when it's sitting to hold it in place even after we've taped it down. And it actually acts as a little bit of a resistance to the screws that level the bed to keep them from turning any small amount over time. The first small issue, so I'm using a 6" by 5" piece of glass from McMaster-Carr. Now, it fits almost perfectly on the build tray. There's a couple of problems though. First problem is that you'll want to check the actual height of your screws, and you can just kind of give them a feel to make sure they're not sticking up over the top of the bed. The reason for that is we don't want these guys artificially raising the glass plate up. So if, like me, your screws are set higher than the top surface of the build plate, you have two options. So one, you can file down or sand down the top of the screw, but there's actually an easier way, and that is just to actually take out a little bit of this hole, bring it down a little further, because the tolerances that these were machined at are not great, so they have quite a bit of variance. In order to fix that, I'm just using a really simple bit here. It's used to remount sheet metal or metal in general to predefined sizes, and for doing this, we're not even going to go beyond the first tip here. We just need to take a little bit out just so that the screw sits flush or below the surface of the build plate. And just ream this out just a little bit more than what it already has. Go. I don't want to take out too much or more than I have to. I'm just shaving a little bit off at a time. There we go. razor blade is passing cleanly over the top of it. We've got nice flush mount set screw there, or tension screw for the bed. So 1 down and 3 to go. And then we're ready to put the glass on top. The second thing is, because of that, when this plate is on here, it actually will cover at least 2 of the screw holes. We're just going to level 2 at a time, basically. So we'll do the front 2, and then we'll do the back 2, and we'll shift back and forth between them. To help me do that, we are going to use a couple of binder clips to hold the glass flat against the heated bed. So you have to be kind of careful with the binder clips as we're doing the leveling process. And in fact, if I release one of the clips, already I can tell that the whole table is slightly out of tolerance, but we'll get that sorted. So the first thing we're going to do, bring our y-axis up to the front here. And we're going to bring it down. So I just want to bring it as close as I can, just so I'm being as accurate as possible. And I'm not actually hitting Z home yet because I'm not sure that I'm on that side of 0. So I'm going to keep coming down, and I'm just going to see if it hits. And if it does, oh, there you go. So it's hit. All right, so now I'm going to back it up. So now that I know it's too high, I'm actually going to initially at least overcorrect this. So let's move my x-axis over just a little bit. Because it's much easier to back out the screws than to screw them in. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn all 2 sides in this case, since they're the 2 that are exposed. I'm going to go ahead and just twist those down a couple of turns just to go way past 0, hopefully. There we go. And now I'm going to try that again with the Z-axis manually. Let's see if I can bring it down. Okay, so we've got it hitting, and let's grab our piece of paper. So just a standard piece of notebook paper, or rather copy paper, printer paper, and we've got clearance there, so that means we're pretty close. So now I'm going to actually raise this up just a bit. There we go. And I'm actually going to move the y-axis out temporarily because I need to home all 3 axes. And to do that, I'm going to need to remove this clip so that the print head doesn't crash in to the front there. I'm just going to move this to the back just so there's 2 points of contact holding the glass on the bed. There we go. I'm going to come in here to the extruder, and I'm going to set the target temperature to 100 and just have it start preheating. The reason for that is actually because I want the fan to turn on. Now I'm going to set the platform to 60 degrees Celsius and have it start preheating. So we actually want to level the bed with the hot end turned on and the bed at a reasonable temperature. The reason for that is lots of things can happen when things get up to temp. Now for the hot end, I'm not setting it up to a melting or an extrusion temperature very much on purpose. I don't want the nozzle to actually ooze out any material. But I am setting the platform up to reasonable temperature, at least to print PLA, so that we have some confidence in the fact that our platform will be level at temperature. So while this is heating up, and I want to get it so that I have just enough room to get my tool in on this guy to get it as close as possible. So let's undo our binder clips, and we're actually going to move the glass bed forward, and we're going to lower the rear 2 screws quite a bit now. Again, I'm purposefully over tightening these so that when I run the next Z home, it will sit above the bed instead of below it. There we go. Okay. So now let's give it another go. Home our axis. There we go. Okay, so we got plenty of space there. So now I'm actually going to move my X in just a tad bit, because right now it's just right on the edge. I'm going to move this back along the Y and make sure that as it goes back, it's always above the table. Just make sure I've got all 4 corners here below the Z0. So it looks good on that side. I'm just going to run across. Make sure it looks good there. Okay. Bring it forward. Now I have to be careful not to run into the binder clip here. Looks like everything's good. Now I can start fine-tuning it. I'm going to move this clip just right here on the front. Just to hold down that front edge as best I can. I'm not going to get it all the way to the edge, but I'm going to get it close enough that I can get in here with my Allen wrench. Let's see, you know what? I might move it over just a little bit so I can get it in vertically. There we go. Now if you've noticed, since I ran the home axis command, I haven't raised or lowered the Z-axis. If you lower the Z-axis all the way down until it hits the limit switch, that may or may not actually correspond to the home axis command. Just depending on the steps, it may actually be lower if you set the Z-axis to 0, just with the jog dial. So I'm just coming in and just visually looking to see how close I am to touching. One of the nice things with the glass bed is you can actually see the reflection of the extruder in the glass surface to give you a pretty good idea of when it's going to hit. So if I bring my paper through, it's clearing it, which is good. And I'm just going to pull it just back and forth a little bit now just to see if it's dragging. So no drag yet. So I'm going to continue to slowly pull this out, just a little bit by a little bit, and I'm going to remove the Allen wrench every time I turn it, just so I'm sure that that isn't causing any deformation in the surface. Oh, there we go. So now it's binding. I don't know if you'll be able to hear that, but I can actually feel the pull on the paper. So I'm gonna go clockwise just a little bit so I can get that pull off. And now as I'm coming further towards X home, it's binding again. So that means I actually need to lower it back down just a tad. So let's try that. So I haven't lowered the other 3 sides yet, so I just want to make sure that it's pretty close here. Okay, so that's pretty good there. So now let's bring it across the table to this edge. All right, and we're going to do basically 2 passes on the printer doing this. So this is kind of the rough pass, if you will. I'm just moving the paper back and forth under the extruder as I raise it up. Just trying to get a feel for when it starts to bind. Okay, so you can see there, it's starting to bind. And it doesn't take much. You can see, you know, it's pretty well stuck under there. So let's give it about 1/8 of a turn forward. It's still pretty stuck. Another 1/8 of a turn. That looks like it might do. Let's see. I'm just gonna get the sheet down to a smaller, slightly more manageable size. Okay. So now that's actually a little too loose. Loosening it up. I just want it to be loose enough so now it's dragging. You need to tighten it back down again. There we go. So you want it to be just so that you can, as you're pulling the paper across, it moves freely, but you can kind of feel the vibration of the fan in the paper. That's really what you're looking for. All right. So now we've got the front 2 pretty well set. So I'm going to just take these 2 binder clips off. I'm just going to shift everything forward just so those back 2 leveling screws are exposed. Just going to clip these guys on here, and we're going to start doing the same thing but for the back of the build platform. So I'm going to move this forward. I'm actually going to turn this whole printer around for you. Now the issue we have here is that these screws can't actually clear the front of this gantry. So it's going to be a little bit more difficult or a little more time consuming to get everything level back here. But it's the same basic process. Move the paper underneath the print head as it's coming back. I'm going counterclockwise to loosen the screw and raise the build platform to hopefully make contact here with, there we go. And I'm just going to bring it back in just a bit. And again, I'm just doing it to feel where it's not really dragging, but as I move the piece of paper under the print head, I can feel the vibration of the fan just a little bit in the paper. So that should be okay there. And before I fine tune this, I'm going to go to the other side of the back and just do a rough adjustment for it as well. Yep, so it's also currently loose. So counterclockwise to raise that up until it starts to bind. It's bound a little bit, so I'm just going to inch it down just a little bit until I get that nice feel there. And now let's see how that works as we go to the back of the Y axis. So as I'm getting back to the back here, it's binding a little too much. So I'm going to back it out just the tiniest amount there. But it's still able to move, so that's good. It's not completely grabbing the paper. I'm going to come across and see if it's a similar story on this side. So on that side it's not too bad. Now the next thing I'm going to do here is actually I'm going to move these binder clips just to the back, just like that. Good to go. Okay. So let's do that again. Move our Y-axis back so we get access to those posts. I'm just going to back this off just a little bit. Again, I just want to be able to barely feel the vibration of the motor. We're talking about really tiny increments here. Okay, there we go. Let's see if that works. That's pretty good. And now let's bring it over to the other side. See if there's any adjustments we need to make over here. So actually on this side it feels pretty good. It's not grabbing, but I can just feel the vibration of the motor. So now that we've done the back, we're going to bring it around to the front one more time and do essentially a final pass. I'm going to take these guys off of there, and I'm just going to clip one to the front. Let's shift our build plate just a little bit. Just going to clip one to the front, clip one to the back, and as it's coming forward, I'm just checking that this is level, and it is binding a little bit, so just going to turn it just the slightest little bit. There we go. Let's see if I can't get all the way to the front with it. No, still binding. So let's back it out. And all I'm doing here is just making these tiny adjustments. Again, just getting it to level. Okay, so that was just a little too much. Do that. I'm just going to back it out just the tiniest bit. Okay, so maybe a little bit more. Oh, let's see, that was too much. I mean, we're talking about turning just like 1/32 of a turn is enough to make that big of a difference. Okay, so it looks good there. I'm just going to back it up so that I make sure I clear my, there we go. So I make sure I can clear this clip. And we'll bring it back across. Oop. I accidentally set the Z again, so we're going to do a home again. So we make sure Z is set properly. Okay. And let's see how it's doing at the front here. Ooh, really tight at the front now. There we go. I'm just going to back this off just so I can get access to this front guy. And he's too high. So we're just going to turn him. I might have actually set it a little low. I'm just going to back it out. Again, just tiny increments can make a big difference. Go. There we go. So now that we've fine-tuned the front, we're going to do the same thing again on the back. Just double checking that everything's good. Okay, and after this pass, so all I'm going to do, just going to release these binder clips for a second. Again, just moving the glass up. Put this binder clip back in place in the back. There we go. Go. Again, all I'm doing is that final, hopefully final update to get this thing level. So you can see it's pulling a little bit now. So I'm just going to do just a tiny turn in. There we go. Same thing for this side. Just needs to be let out just a little bit. Too much, it's binding. There we go. Let out just a tiny bit more. Okay. Now let's test it. Feels good. So now all four sides should be pretty darn equal. Okay. Just going to run it quickly over the center here. To check. Ooh, the center's really tight. Let's make sure it's not this front edge that's tight. It is. Okay. So the front's got to come down. So I'm just going to take the binder clips, just going to move this ever so slightly, put them back on. Again, double check with our paper that it is indeed too tight, and we're going to lower the front. There we go. And I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but the difference between it dragging and not dragging was like turning this by a millimeter, if that. There we go. So let's just check it again. Whoop. And now on the back, it's too tight. I'm just going to take the clips up. Put them back down so that I can adjust the back. Okay. Here we go. It's feeling pretty good. Yep. Okay, so I think we've got it leveled. Now, the last thing I need to check is I'm actually going to remove the binder clips one last time here. And I'm just going to do a press test. And what that is, I'm just going to push on all four corners individually and make sure that there's no bow on either of the four sides. And everything does look nice and level here, which is exactly what we want. So now that we've got it leveled at temperature, I'm going to raise the Z up just a little bit. Okay. And let's move it back in. Okay. And now, rather than using the binder clips permanently, I'm just going to use some pieces of blue tape to hold the platform in place. It's much lower profile, so I don't have to worry about the binder clips hitting anything. Go. I just want to make sure that I've got everything centered as best I can. Okay. And the bed is still heated when I'm doing this. Go. And then I'll put the pieces on left and right side. As well. These don't have to be on there super duper tight. Here we go. So that's really all there is to it. Once everything's on, now we should be ready to print.